Now we're going to get into more specifics regarding the digestive system. We're going to take a look at the specific organs and the enzymes that break down the material that's taken in by that organ, as well as the accessory organs that provide other enzymes to help break down either fats, which are lipids, proteins, or carbohydrates. Now remember, proteins are going to be broken down into amino acids, carbohydrates, primarily polysaccharides, broken down into disaccharides, and then monosaccharides. So we know the purpose of the digestive system is to move the food through the alimentary canal and then break down that food and send that and allow the blood to absorb those nutrients, those elements, and have the blood send it to the cells for energy, growth, and repair. Remember, the alimentary canal is the pathway in which food passes from the mouth to the anus. The liver, the pancreas, the gallbladder, those are not part of the alimentary canal, but those are part of the digestive system, and we'll look at those today. So as you skim through this, you can actually see some things that you're familiar with. The 3 salivary glands, which are in the mouth. We talked about what the pharynx was, and then we move down the esophagus, and we move into, and we'll talk about the parts of the stomach, the small intestine, and how the pancreas, liver, and gallbladder secrete enzymes into the small intestine. And then we have the different parts of the small intestine, and then the different parts or names of the large intestine. You can skim through, you can actually see on this page what are the enzymes, what is being broken down regarding protein, carbohydrate, or fat, as well as nucleic acid. Because if we're eating meat, you're not only going to want to break down the protein that makes up that meat, but you're breaking down the cell of the meat and what's inside. We're going to first start with the mouth. If you can take a look I'd like you to be aware of some of these terms, even though they don't have a direct digestion. They may be part or helping with the digestion, as the lips protect the opening, allow you to keep the mouth closed as you chew. The cheeks are the wall, preventing food to come out the sides when you chew. You have the hard and soft palate, which is the roof of the mouth, keeping that food in. You do have the uvula, which is the little hangy ball structure. We already talked about the structure of the mouth with the teeth. We talked about the tongue structures. So we're just going to kind of skim through those accessory parts. We also talked about the structures of the tonsil, and we'll talk about those more in the immune system. And again, we already talked about the 3 salivary glands and their function. Some of these terms regarding what mastication or chewing is, what the bolus is, that bowl of food that has saliva, and the saliva not only starts breaking down the sugar because of the salivary amylase, but it provides a lubricant to allow the food to smoothly go down the esophagus. Then we move into the pharynx, which is the throat. We're primarily going to be focusing on the oropharynx, but there are 3 different types of throat parts. The nose throat, you really don't want to get any food up there if you're laughing. Sometimes maybe if you got milk out your nose or food out your nose, that's not generally where you want it going. You have the oropharynx, oro meaning mouth, mouth throat, and then you have the larynx and the pharynx, which is referring to that part that's going to be going and leading to or separating the larynx and the esophagus. It's going to help guide food down the esophagus, not down the trachea. So the pharynx, again, it is the initial pathway. That throat then leads us from the mouth to the esophagus. It propels the food down using muscles. And this is starting your process of peristalsis. And there's really no new digestion occurring in the pharynx or the esophagus. It just kind of continues the digestion of the carbohydrate, the starch, from the salivary amylase. Now we move into the esophagus, and at the very top and bottom of the esophagus, you have some sphincters And a sphincter is a ring of muscle that opens and closes. It provides a safeguard to prevent food from, or that bolus from coming back up out of the esophagus. That sphincter will open if you're vomiting, of course, but that's not natural or normal on an everyday basis. You have a lower sphincter that prevents stomach acid or the chyme from coming up into the esophagus. And so if you ever have heartburn, that's because the acidic chyme, the acid, the hydrochloric acid is coming up out of the stomach into the esophagus. So that's going to cause a lot of pain because of the acid. Now, the esophagus runs from the pharynx to the stomach, and this passes through the diaphragm. So there is a part of the esophagus that is near the heart. As it passes through, the esophagus is not only going to move and squeeze down the bolus through the process of peristalsis, but it's also going to try and move it back and forth and separate and do a little bit of mixing. So mixing is not only happening in the mouth with the tongue and the teeth and the cheeks, but you're also having a segmentation or a separation happening also in the esophagus as it kind of bounces that bolus down through the esophagus. And as we said, the trachea goes down to the lungs, the esophagus goes down to the stomach. So the epiglottis, we kind of saw that in the back of the tongue. That epiglottis kind of is that little doorway preventing any food going down the trachea. The esophagus is about 20 centimeters long, and it will secrete some mucus, not anything that is digestive, but the mucus is more to, again, help lubricate and move the food down so it's not dry. There are two illustrations identifying peristalsis and segmentation. The esophagus moving the bolus down. Now let's move into the stomach. There are a couple terms that you do need to be aware of. There's an upper sphincter, just like the esophagus, and a lower sphincter. Now the upper sphincter is near the heart. It's at the lower part of the esophagus. And so we have this word cardio referring to heart, and then esophagus or esophageal referring to the esophagus. So the sphincter again is that ring of muscle kind of acting as a door, kind of closing, preventing the chyme and the hydrochloric acid from coming out of the stomach. Now the fundus is this upper arch of the stomach. This is actually higher than where the opening of the sphincter is at the stomach, between the stomach and the esophagus. You have the body or the bulk of the stomach where all the food is going to be kind of sitting in there. You have these folds. These folds are called rugae, and these actually expand to allow more food to fill up the stomach. We have the pylorus, which is the funnel-shaped part at the end of the stomach, and then we have the pyloric sphincter, which is the lower end sphincter that separates the stomach from the small intestine. Again, the stomach is a J-shaped muscular storage bag. Digestion occurs for about 5 hours in the stomach. Some resources say 6 to 8 hours. And during this vigorous churning in the stomach, we have mechanical digestion, so it's a mixing together. But then we also have the continual digestion of the salivary amylase from the mouth. So that's going to continue to break down, but there is no salivary amylase being secreted from the stomach. The stomach's job is to break down protein, and that's going to be caused by a secretion of the enzyme pepsin. So pepsin is going to break down proteins. The stomach is also going to secrete hydrochloric acid, HCl, and pepsinogen to help break down food, specifically the protein. Now, chyme is a green semi-solid mixture, and if you ever do a dissection, you open it up, you'll see this green kind of liquidy material. That is the chyme. And as the chyme leaves the pylorus, and enters the small intestine, it's going to actually trigger some different responses of the small intestine. If there's a lot of fat in the chyme, that's going to secrete bile liquids from the liver. And we also have, again, hydrochloric acid is used to kill bacteria. So not only is the hydrochloric acid used to break down, but it's to kill foreign invaders. Then we have the mucous membranes or mucosa. And basically what these are going to do is try to balance the acidic area. The alkaline means more basic, so that's opposite of acid. We have the mucous neck cells. We have gastric glands, which secretes the gastric juice, the hydrochloric acid. We have chief cells, which produce the enzymes to break down protein. We have the parietal cells, which produce more hydrochloric acid. We have endocrine cells that will produce hormones, and you'll learn about the endocrine system produces hormones, and this produces a hormone called gastrin, and this is going to stimulate more hydrochloric acid or gastric juice. You can see here, you can see the basic glands in the cells. You can see the little gastric pits. You can see the chief cells that we talked about and the secretion of pepsinogen and hydrochloric acid. Now we're going to move into the liver. The liver is the largest gland. It's considered a glandular organ, so it's considered a gland. And a gland is a particular organ that secretes a specific substance. So in this case, it's going to be secreting bile. And the liver is a dark brown gland, and it's going to be located on the right side of the body, right underneath the diaphragm, so below the lungs. The liver consists of 4 lobes, and the liver has a little groove or indentation at the bottom where the gall bladder is going to kind of sit in. We'll talk about that in a little bit. It's going to be connected to the gall bladder by the hepatic duct. Now, hepatic refers to the liver, and it's going to secrete the bile, or also known as gall, into the small intestine through that bile duct. Now, the liver is going to also filter a lot of fats. As you can see, you have the hepatic vein and the hepatic artery. So the artery brings the blood into the liver. The liver is then going to filter anything in the blood that is too fatty or any poisons like alcohol. So anything that was in the stomach and the small intestine and the large intestine absorbed through the villi and microvilli, absorbed the nutrients into the blood. The blood then sends it to the liver, and the liver is going to detoxify. So you can actually have a very fatty liver because it's detoxifying fats, drugs, alcohol, and you can have liver failure if you're taking in too much. The liver will also degrade or break down hormones. It will produce cholesterol, blood proteins, and it will help with metabolism, providing energy. It also stores iron and different fat-soluble vitamins such as vitamin A, D, E, and vitamin K. Now, the gallbladder is actually found underneath in a little depression on the underside of the liver. It stores bile from the liver by the way of the cystic duct. It's also going to be triggered to release bile if the chyme that is being released from the stomach to the small intestine is containing too much fat, and this helps break down the fat in the small intestine. Then we have gallstones, which is a small little crystalline mass of cholesterol and calcium salts. This is going to definitely cause blockage of the bile, and it also causes pain as some of the gallstones may be pushed through the different canals or ducts. Now we have the pancreas, and this gland is going to produce insulin and glycagon, which helps regulate blood sugar. So this is going to produce enzymes into the small intestine as well. Now the pancreas is more of a grayish or pinkish color, even though in a lot of pictures it's yellow. It's going to be even a light tan color. And it's more of a fish-shaped or an elongated pear shape. Now, different alkaline fluids, which is the opposite of your acidic, so this is more of a basic fluid, will introduce enzymes that will neutralize the very acidic chyme. It will also help break down protein and sugars. Now, the small intestine is going to be broken down into three main parts. You can remember this, such as dogs just itch. D goes first, the duodenum, jejunum, then ileum. Think of ileum like iliac crest is more where the hips are. So dogs just itch. The duodenum is going to be the first one. Okay, attached to the stomach. Then it's going to move to more of the anterior jejunum. And then the last part is the ileum, which connects to the large intestine. The focus of the small intestine is to digest all food materials such as sugars, fats, and proteins. So the pancreas is going to secrete enzymes into the small intestine. The liver is going to secrete enzymes into the small intestine. It's also going to receive enzymes to break down protein. The small intestine is generally going to be an organ that's going to be the main site of absorption of the nutrients. So we have the villi and microvilli. We have the small intestine extending about 21 feet. It's the longest organ in the digestive system. And it's going to be held against the abdominal wall by the mesentery, which is a translucent thin organ. And you have probably seen this when we dissected frogs. So this is going to be a material that has blood vessels, and it's going to try and nourish some of the organs. So this holds the organs in place so they don't get all tied up. You don't want to run and then your small intestine gets all tied up in knots. So the duodenum is only a foot long, so it's the shorter section. Then we have the jejunum, which is about 8 feet, and ileum, which is the last 12 feet. So 21 feet total. And as we said, we have interstitial cells that break down disaccharides or double sugars into monosaccharides. It also has protein digestion. We have the pancreas secreting enzymes. These pancreatic enzymes are going to break down starch as well as protein. So we have pancreatic amylase, which breaks down the sugar, enzyme to break down sugar. We have trypsin, which is an enzyme to break down protein. And then we have lipase, which this is an enzyme to break down fat or lipids. And then we also have nucleases, which breaks down the nucleic acids, which is your DNA and RNA. Now, bile enters the small intestine from the gallbladder to break down fats. And then you also have your alkaline content, as we said, coming from the pancreas to the small intestine to neutralize any acidic chyme. And then there's some water absorption, even though majority of your water absorption is going to occur in the large intestine. Here you have the villi, which are the larger finger-like structures with blood vessels in them to absorb nutrients. You have the microvilli, and then you have the Peyer's patches. Now these are going to be the lymphatic tissues in the folds of the small intestine, which help with immunity. This is something we're going to learn when we learn about the immune system or lymphatic system. Now we're going to end with the large intestine or the colon. We first have from the small intestine, we have the cecum, which is kind of this little sac. As the large intestine starts, there's this sagging part of the large intestine. That's called the cecum. And then hanging off of that, we have the appendix. And it is known that the appendix is an accumulation of lymphatic tissue. So it does help with the immune system. If your body has a large bacterial infection, if it becomes inflamed, one will have appendicitis and you would have to have surgery. A lot of scientists in the past said that the appendix had no function had no function, but it was just a vestigial organ left over from evolution. But now we're seeing that a lot of scientists are seeing that it does have a function in the lymphatic system for immunity. Then we have the ascending colon, which is the large intestine going up. Then we have the transverse colon going across. And then we have the descending colon. Now, after the descending colon, we have this little S-shaped colon, which is the sigmoid part, and it ends with the last or final section of the large intestine called the rectum. Now, the anal canal, or the anus, this little opening, is controlled by a sphincter. Remember, a sphincter is the little muscle that creates a little opening or door as it tightens, opens, and closes. So that is called the anal sphincter. So the large intestine is larger in diameter than the small intestine, but it is shorter. Now, the main function of the colon is to absorb water. So if you have a problem with diarrhea, then most likely you might have a virus or some sort of infection that's prohibiting your large intestine from absorbing water. The large intestine is going to eliminate indigestible food, so any roughage, any fiber will be excreted out of the body, but it is good to eat the fiber as it helps clean the large intestine. Now, there's no digestive enzymes happening, no digestion happening in the colon. It's mainly going to absorb water and start moving the excess food out. It's primarily going to defecate the waste out. Now, the large intestine does have goblet cells which produce mucus, and just like the esophagus, it will act as a lubricant. And the large intestine also produces and absorbs vitamin K and vitamin B, and it's going to release a lot of gas, and it's also going to release any remaining materials and any gases when one defecates the feces. Okay, so you can see the cecum, the appendix, the ascending, transverse, and descending colons, the sigmoid colon, and the rectum and anal canal. And as you can see here, we talked about the defecation process, the anal canal, the anal sphincter, which is the little muscle that tightens, opens, and closes. And as the large intestine fills with waste, the anal sphincter will relax and open, allowing one to defecate. And this is primarily when the amount of waste builds up and expands the rectum, and this is going to trigger the nervous system response to relax that sphincter. This is the digestion process going from the mouth to the anus, starting with ingestion, the different digestions, absorption, and defecation.